to do. Great, excellent. Okay, so thank you everyone for coming to the inaugural Torah and a Shmear. You keep coming, I'll keep getting bagels. I take requests for kinds of cream cheese or other schmears that might go on said bagels, just so you know. Whatever ShopRite has, I'm willing to buy for you. So my goal each week is to zero in on like a few verses, like one specific section, and try and go real deep rather than go broad through the whole parsha. This week in particular, in fact, the next few weeks, really for the first half of the book of Exodus, are like every verse is almost its own, they make movies about these parts. This is the Passover story for the next bunch of weeks. And here we get early Moses. Remember Joseph, like all good movies, it ended, Genesis ended on a high note. Yes, Jacob passed away, but the brothers are all getting along. They're doing great in Egypt. Jews are loved in Egypt. Joseph has a strong position. And then there's 70 of them at the moment. And then this week picks up and they're reproducing rapidly. There's now a lot of them. And a new king arises who doesn't know them, and that's when the oppression starts. That's when the slavery starts. And yeah,
I read this like some 60
yeah,
years ago.
Great. Yeah, I was gonna say I'm gonna give you a pass on the first 2 or 3.
That was your bedtime? Where was Joseph when he was busy? He was okay with the first Pharaoh. Why did he help him say, be a representative with the new one?
Excellent. So a key question is, how did this crazy thing happen? So there are a million different answers. It's not the main focus this morning, so I'll give you 2 of them quickly. One is he died. So one is he wasn't around anymore. 2 is and this is true scholarly, there was a period in Egypt's ancient history where there was this group of people who ruled Egypt who were cosmopolitan and interested in were happy to have people from different places leading different parts, and they were overthrown by Egypt First movement, if you will, who only wanted Egyptians. And so one possibility is this is plugging into that narrative that literally a new pharaoh, like a new regime, took over who didn't care about the Jews. But what is a good segue is the third answer I'll give you, because I always think in threes, which is, were the Jewish people the same or not? Because one of the questions that I often am left with, so Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they all talk to God and they get the same promise. You believe in me, I'm your God, and you're gonna have 1 million descendants, a lot of them. And, I always looked around because I always thought that was, frankly, not a very exciting reward. Like, I was like, maybe he wants a hot tub. Maybe he wants, a stay at the Bereshit hotel or whatever. What does it mean to do this? And not only that, it seems like the reward that is the continual punishment. Because the truth is, if that's the blessing, it happens. There's 13 million Jews, give or take, in the world right now. From one family, that is more numerous than the stars. That is more numerous than the grains of sand at the beach. That is an easy definition, except it doesn't seem to mention that the rest of the world grew way more. That everyone else got a whole lot more people. So not only that, so what does it actually mean? And here in this parsha is where it really happens. In these verses, we go from 70 people, a few families, a clan, a group who could be like sort of housed in a compound, to a massive people with its own potential identity, with its own potential purpose. And it really goes about as poorly as possible. So I want to look at what does it mean to grow and to change in that way, and what does it actually look like when it happens. And one more thing before we jump in, which is the key, Adam and Eve, or the first 2 people, are created, and God says, puru, or I can never pronounce this word. Yes, you all said it great. I get the pronunciation wrong. Be fruitful and multiply. That's the main purpose. God tells humanity that's our job, is to have lots of people. But the phrase doesn't actually come out that way in this. And we're going to look at the Hebrew of that in a little bit. Does someone feel up for reading? We're going to read just first passages from Exodus and the beginning. You're welcome to read in Hebrew, but I'm looking for the English. Thank you, Barbara.
Joseph died and all his brothers and all that generation. But the Israelites were fertile and prolific. They multiplied and increased very greatly, so that the land was filled with them. A new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, look, the Israelite people are much too numerous for us. Let us deal shrewdly with them so that they may not increase. Otherwise, in the event of war, they may join our enemies in fighting against us and rise from the ground. So they set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor. And they built garrison cities for Pharaoh, Pithom, and Ramses. But the more they were oppressed, the more they increased and spread out, so that the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. The Egyptians ruthlessly imposed upon the Israelites the various labors that they made them perform. Ruthlessly, they made life bitter for them with harsh labor at mortar and bricks, and all sorts of tasks in the field.
Okay, so you would expect, if you read Genesis, that the final fulfillment of God's promise that the Jewish people grow to be numerous would be a celebration. There'd be fireworks. This is the 4th of July story of the Jewish people. We are finally numerous, but we grow not in the land of Israel, we grow in Egypt, problem one, and everyone else hates us for it. That's the response. In fact, I didn't even think of it till just now. There's actually no response from the Jewish people here. And the Jewish people praised God for fulfilling God's promise to let the people become numerous and a great nation. They have almost the only people commenting are Pharaoh and his courtiers, are the only people who seem to notice or be a part of it. So what I want, first, I don't have any thoughts, comments, questions so far.
This just strikes me as like the original anti-Semitic statement.
Yes, this is where, for sure, you could go back farther, Esau, and it's deeply personal in Genesis, but we get to the systemic, these are the bad people, there's too many of them, they have too much power. It is like everything that you could see if you go to an ADL meeting or an AJC thing or whatever, 100%, this is in our own story where it begins. Yes.
There's no leader for the Jewish people. Doesn't use any leadership. There's no union leader or anything. And God kind of fell asleep at the wheel.
Well, God was the leader.
Yeah. So, but Genesis has all of these. Every parsha, every story is driven by a Jewish charismatic personality of some kind throughout all of the book of Genesis, at least once we get Abraham. There aren't Jews before that, so other different personalities. Suddenly, we have no protagonist. There is no leader. So the growth seems to have come on its own without any direction, at least from the Jewish people's point of view. And 100% as well. What was the second thing you said?
God kind of like.
Yeah, where is God in this? Yes, so this is 100. So this is a key problem for us as Jews. If God is God, God already told Jacob, don't worry, go down. You're going to grow, but things are going to be bad in Egypt for a while, but then they'll get better. It's actually a recurring prophecy in Genesis a few times. You're going to go to Egypt, you're going to get lots of people, but then bad things are going to happen, but it'll get better. The rabbis, as we'll see in a little bit, are deeply concerned with this ultimate question, because if God is God, these people didn't do anything. So it's one thing to say God's going to oppress Jewish people who are bad at being Jews. Idol worshipers, God's going to send them famine and plague, and like that fits in biblical theology. But all they did was be born in Egypt. So why is God not showing up for them the way God has is a key theological question, a thorn in our side, like the grain of sand in our eye. It doesn't, it's a flaw in the story, 100%. Yes.
So phrase 12, the more they were oppressed, the more they increased and spread out. I mean, that doesn't seem to me like they're new Jews are being born, it's they're coming, they're joining.
Ah, that could be, and actually there are a few in particular when the Jews leave Egypt in a few weeks. There is absolutely appears to be a group of non-Jews who are like, I just watched the 10 plagues. Why am I worshiping Ramses and Ra and whatever? I'm in with the Jews. It's like a half a verse, but it's still pretty clear. The rabbi, it is a reasonable read. The rabbis understand it to be more births. So the traditional, but the spread out sounds like we are converting as we go. It's true. We're going to get into that verse a lot. I thought you were going to say something else because the rabbis look exactly that verse. They say the opposite of you. But we will get to that in a little bit. Anyone else? Yes.
The more you spread out, the more you assimilate, and then you kind of just like lose.
So you also said another key word there, which is assimilate. So what does that? We don't even really have a culture yet. We're only 70 people at the beginning. So the fact that we're able to develop our own culture is also really fascinating. It is actually the opposite happens. In fact, last week or the week before, Joseph does a few things to separate the Jews out to make sure the Egyptians won't try and marry them and take them in, that they'll be separate and do their own thing. And that works. Like, it's very clear that the Jews are their own nation living in Egypt as a separate people. That's the real problem. There's a famous story that during the Enlightenment, Napoleon was in charge of France, and he was like, everyone could be French. And he said to the Jewish people, I want you to form a Sanhedrin and decide to be French instead of Jewish. Like, we want you, come join in, but you got to pick us. And so there is like this common story of Jews living in other people's lands and their weird relationship with the locals and the discomfort in the otherness of them. Usually the story goes actually that they need an other to be able to break up whatever bad system they've got, and that's the Jews come in and fill whatever role that is. That's why we became lawyers. No one wanted to be lawyers in America. That's why we became money lenders, because no one wanted to do that. Throughout the line, and then we do well, and they're like, now we're done with you and you should leave. Is a repeating story for the Jews. All right, good crowd. All right, I want to go, so there were 3 verses about being fertile and numerous. I want to look at each one and focus in on the exact words. So Exodus 1:7 says, Uvnei Yisrael paru vayishretzu vayirbu. But the Israelites were fertile and prolific. They multiplied and increased very greatly, so the land was filled with them. So if you'll remember, what was that Hebrew phrase from the Bible? Thank you. So this one that has both of those words, paru vayirbu, it's not exactly the words, but it adds another one in the middle, vayishretzu, which will go to Rashi first, the next one there, and they increased abundantly, vayishretzu. More literally, they swarmed, a word used for the prolificness of reptiles. And in fact, in that same creation story, when the bugs are created, the swarming things, that's the word used for bugs, not for humans. So I didn't get so into it, but there are a number of midrashim that discuss that the first Hebrews were like animals. They were just doing what you do to reproduce all the time. That's what they did, and that's why there were so many. Rashi gets a different answer, which is nice. They bore 6 children at one birth, because there are 6 words that talk about being fertile in the verse. Paru, vayishretzu, vayirbu, vayamtzu, b'me'od me'od. 6 verses. So each birth was 6 kids, which you can imagine. Everyone here has children or grandchildren. If each of them were 6, you can quickly imagine Woodbury Jewish Center wouldn't have a membership problem. Not that we haven't. We're doing great, by the way. But either way, so we imagine some sort of magic amount of miraculousness to this growth, which it gets to the God question of where is God, God is making these births happen particularly effectively. This is the more negative one. Would someone read the Sforno?
Will someone read the what?
The Sforno, page 2.
7171.
Yeah.
After the last of the original 7 migrants had died, their whole lifestyle became more like that of creeping insects, creatures headed for destruction. This is why when
Melech Chadash Mitzrayim Asher Lo Yada Et Yosef Come on, a new king arose. A new king arose from in
although
Egypt.
there can be no question that in the annals of Egyptian history, the 80-year reign of Joseph and his legislation saving Egypt from the famine was duly recorded, as well as how he legislated that the whole land would belong to Pharaoh and the farmers who would become his tenants. It did not occur to anyone to associate the Hebrews of this time with the family of Joseph, who had been so highly esteemed. The idea that the present-day Hebrews deserve special consideration on account of their illustrious forebears did not occur to anyone observing the way these Hebrews behaved at that time.
So here you get to one of the differences is that the people couldn't imagine they were the same people. There were 70 of them originally. Now there's 600,000 of them. Also, they were 70 of the best. They were our heroes. They were named. And now there's 600,000 and they're like animals. They're like rabbits would be the phrase we use in English. Why would we give them any special consideration? They're a low people. They're not, there's nothing worthy about them. All right, let's do yes, so then Chizkuni mentions that it was the promise given to Jacob, but let's do the Da'atz Genim, which is a medieval commentary. Is anyone else feel up to reading that one?
Wait, I'm sorry, how long elapsed between when Joseph died and?
A great question. I'm not going to answer you because we don't know. I mean, I could give you 100 different answers. According to this, Joseph reigned, he was like 30 when he started his reign, so he reigned for 50 years, and then some amounts later was this. The Bible is terrible at numbers, and even if I gave you an answer, it wouldn't be a good answer because they're conflicting and different. The Bible is not great at it, and the rabbi's interpretation of the Bible is worse. So we're definitely meant to be clear that it's a new group of people from the same. And what we've now learned is that, yes, we multiply dramatically, but we're not acting like we did before. We don't have the same reputation. We don't have our leaders. We don't have any heroes. We are known for is having lots and lots of babies. Is where we are right now. The amount of time is questionable. Would someone, good question though. Would someone be up for the Da'at Zakanim read?
Yeah, it's the same thing. It's the six thing.
So let's go to the next one. Sorry. Rashbam had something interesting. Yes, Rashbam goes even farther. Why don't you read that one, David? Thank you.
Vayatzmu, they did not even die in early adulthood, but they were all healthy specimens, the ma'od ma'od, until the whole country became full of them. But Timalei ha'aretz otam. The Torah describes perception of fullness, much as Ezekiel describing V'hachatzer malei et noga kvod Adonai. The inner courtyard was filled with the glow and the glory of Hashem. This was a perception, not something tangible. Similarly, Isaiah by Mishalev Maleim et Hahechal, and its skirts filled the sanctuary.
Okay, so
Maleim et Hahechal.
So Rashbam goes on to say even further, two important things. One, not only did God miraculously have all these super births, but they were all healthy, and not just healthy, they remained healthy. They were strong. And then the last piece, and they filled the land, goes exactly to what Wendy and we've been mentioning a few times, is it's not just that there were so many of us, is that there were perceived to be so many of us. That our reputation was like, oh my God, they're everywhere. For those of you who have lived on Long Island a long time, might feel the same way about the South and East Asian communities that have moved in to Long Island in the last 30 to 40 years. It went from you knew one person to like neighborhoods and restaurants and whatever. It can be threatening. It can be scary when suddenly there is a lot of people who seem different than there were before, even though there may not be anything there as well. That's for real. All right, let's jump ahead. Yes, that was good. Yeah, that's a nice midrash, but we don't need it right now. Okay, let's go to the next time. The Pharaoh says, and he said to his people, look, the Israelite people are much too numerous for us. I stress again, it's fascinating to me. We finally get the blessing we've been owed, and the only response is Pharaoh saying, this is terrible. This is awful. Rav atzum mimenu. Atzum is this strength word that it implies that not just numerous, but they're stronger than they should be. The Orach Chaim has an interesting all right, let's do it. Let's end. Who would like to read that comment? The Orach Chaim. Thanks, David.
Hava chachmalo, pen your back. Let us outsmart them before they become numerous. If we do not put a stop to their population explosion, they will do exactly what the prophecy has forecast. Ba'alam in haaretz, they will move back to the land of Canaan and destroy our Canaanite brothers. Egypt's first decree against such a possibility had been a ban on Jews leaving the country.
Yes. Why does it make no sense?
They leave, and there would be a problem.
Right. So we get the separate thing is that ultimately we weren't necessarily a problem for Egypt. And so the rabbis are because we were always planned on heading back. And so that's the question the rabbi is asking is, why is Egypt so concerned about us? Why not tell us to leave? Go back to your land. You're from somewhere else. And he says that they love the Canaanites so much that they want to help their Canaanite brothers out. It's a bad interpretation. I agree. But the problem is interesting. Like, sorry, I remember why I brought this. It points out exactly the earlier problem of the lack of leaders. Because now we're so many. Egypt obviously doesn't like us. We have a whole other place to go. God promised it to us. We lived there for a little while. Why no one of the 600,000 people was like, they're being real mean to us. Let's go home. So great.
But there was a workforce in Egypt. Why would the Egyptians, I think the Egyptians wanted to leave because they were building.
Yeah, so there's a question of chicken and an egg there, of when we became the workforce or not. But yes, at some point, for sure, we become like the same reason the South didn't want to let go of slavery. Like it's free labor. How do you? Everything's the economy, always. 100%. But either way, it further describes who we were now that we became numerous enough to be a people, which is we seem to have no direction or ability to properly have self-preservation.
I mean, I keep bringing this back to what's happening, in modern day, like seeing so many parallels, it's scaring me. In the 20 years ago, it was, go back to Israel.
Yeah.
Anti-Semitism in the US was get out of here, go back to where you came from. Now it's get out of Israel. You don't belong there. You're
well, it depends on the
colonizers. I mean,
community.
it's kind of the, if you're talking about not just Egyptians and Canaanites working as separate peoples, but just a general desire to eliminate the culture, that kind of fits with this. But it reminds me, there's a story, and I don't know the source of it, but there was a very rich man, a very pious man. You probably know where this came from. I hope you do.
Find out.
But he received lots of blessings, and an angel turned to God and said, yes, but it's so easy for him to be pious.
It's the story of Job.
And everything else.
It's in the Bible.
Okay. This is why I'm here. I don't
Great.
But you don't know how good he is until you really test him. And I feel like this is what's happening to the Jewish people.
So your argument would be this is a test of the Jewish people. Can we overcome it? Can we show ourselves. And if that's the case, we're failing miserably. No one is stepping up. We've mentioned not a single Jewish name. In this whole introduction, there is no, we don't even have the tribes mentioned. Pharaoh doesn't even say, maybe, Naphtali, they're some nice guys, but, Reuven, the Reuvenites, they're the schmoes or whatever. There's just one mass of people that other people don't like, squeezed perhaps between the Canaanites and the Egyptians. 100%, I think the reading is right on. I'm just debating. I'm looking ahead to see. We don't need to do that one. It's interesting, but okay, so this is fascinating also. Orach Chaim, the same commentator, a little bit on the word hine. In the Hebrew, we go back to the Pharaoh says, behold, hine is like, check it out. And it's a weird thing. Why can't, it's a weird introduction. Thanks for joining, Bob. Would someone be up for reading that one at the top of the page on 4? Thanks.
The word hine may also be understood as follows. Hine am, here is a nation. In other words, they are a people different from any other. Every other nation is an amalgamation of a number of different people. Not so the Jewish people. They are monolithic, a single block. And Pharaoh added the words Rav Atzum, explained that the strength of the Jewish nation lay in its single-mindedness and unity of purpose. Because of this, they represent a danger totally disproportionate to their actual numbers. Most military commanders are familiar with the phenomenon of a small, elite, but highly motivated force.
So this is a perfect example of oftentimes with commentary, you learn more about the commentator than what they're commentating on. There is no basis for this interpretation in what we have read. This is out of left field, except it's probably his lived reality. That wherever, I did not look up where he's from, but there's probably lives in somewhat of a cosmopolitan place, or he imagines, at least that's the way it was. But in fact, most people see themselves as as part of one thing, as part of, we're all on the same team. But the Jews, the might of the Maccabees, you might say, is exactly in this kind of thing. Not only that, but it is a dream. The Israelites present no unification at all. In fact, the only time they speak with one voice, now that I think about it, is when Moses comes back and Moses says, I'm here to free you. And they say, you're going to make it worse. Get out of here. So the idea that we are unified is an effortful rereading of the text, an understandable one. We want to like ourselves, but it's still, that's the way it is. All right, I want it spread out that Exodus 1:12. But the more they were oppressed, the more they increased and spread out. So the Egyptians came to dread them. I have what time is it? Yeah, so I want to wrap up with well, that's really just a fun story. I want to wrap up with the Rashbam because I think this is the most interesting one. I'm going to read it. Vayakotsu. They became frustrated with their own lives when watching the development of the Israelites. This expression for frustration with one's own life had already been used when Rivka could not bear thinking about Yaakov marrying a Canaanite girl. It also occurs in a similar sense in Isaiah. When the Egyptians look at the Jews, what were they dreading? They were jealous. Look how good they have it. I can't stand it. We have to oppress them. And Wendy will quickly say, I imagine that this sounds exactly like this is our story. We have moved to a place, we have done well as a people, and then people are like, how come you have and I don't?
And you literally just said this.
Yes. Yeah, his anti-Semitism at least cost him $1 billion. one of the things that I think is fascinating here is there's on not shockingly 3 levels. The first is be careful what you wish for. We are this lonely people in Genesis, wandering, hoping to have safety and security, being like, if only we were numerous like everyone else, we would be okay. And God says, I'll make it happen. You're going to be numerous. We're finally numerous, and we're less safe than we were. Worse things happen to us once we become numerous. We get enslaved as a people, taskmasters, hundreds of years of enslavement, which is the second thing, which is having another generation doesn't guarantee another generation. Is I think one of the things that's laying up here. Yes, you can have more people, but without the leaders, without the stuff, without the things that make us Jewish, you don't actually get necessarily a people. You don't get the things that make us great without all of that stuff. And finally, I would say I think this is here because it's not like today, actually. The themes are there. We feel echoes of it. But we actually live at an interesting moment, I think, because these terrible themes are on the rise again. But unlike, I think, other times, we are a pretty organized Jewish people. Unlike other times, I mean, we don't get along about a lot of stuff, and I can spend the next 3 days, if you want, talking about the ways in which we're fighting with each other and all the rest. But on a big picture level, we have a lot of our communal resources directed in both directions of both fighting anti-Semitism, saying you're bad for being anti-Semitic, but also bringing those people who might feel jealous about what we have and either showing them we don't have what you think we have, or sharing and bringing up or raising up or lifting up or making relationships. And my hope is that is one of the lessons here, is that be fruitful and multiply actually isn't enough. It is a great start, but that then we actually have to do something with those lives. We have to live them. We have to work together. We have to build relationships, share kindness, share culture, share traditions, pass them on in a way that is exciting and meaningful to those that want, because when those original 70 aren't there anymore, who is going to be the ones who step up? And I think that's one of the core lessons. I am one of those who is skeptical about the historicity conversation. Like, are we really reading something that happened exactly the way it lays out in the Torah? I don't know, because from my point of view, that's not the Torah's job, is not to tell us what happened. The Torah's job is to tell us who we are now. And who we are now is a people who understand our own history as fraught. When I convert someone, I always sit down at some point and say, I want you to understand that you're choosing to join a people that a lot of other people hate. I want you to understand what you are taking on for you and your family, that this is a real thing that exists in the world, and God willing, you'll never really experience it. God willing, you'll surround yourself in a loving, happy community, but it's out there in the world, and it's a bad thing. Even with that, we have to find a way to balance our blessings, the things that we get and have and are able to do, with building relationships with those outside, so they don't come to dread us. So they don't look at us as we filled the land, and that we stand up and say, you may not set taskmasters over us. You may not, we say no, not just because it's wrong, but because we are mighty, and we will use that might to push back and stand strong and make it different. So when we read this week, if we read the creation of the Jewish nation, I hope we remember that we have to be more than just a new generation, more than a people. We have to be great. Zoomers, thanks for joining in. Good to see you. Have a great Thursday.
Thank you. Let's
Thank
go.
you. The next Thursday, same time, same place. How do I?
Same Shmear.
Ah, there we go.